please join with me in welcoming Dr Fred Schroeder, the President of the World Blind Union, to speak to us on the celebration of White Cane Day. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. What a lovely introduction and welcome. I'm kind of thinking that whatever I say now is going to be a letdown after that wonderful build-up. I asked Graham as we came in this evening, I said, do you have any advice for me? Because he knows you all and knows the issues, and so I was hoping to be given something that I could say that would make you think I was very knowledgeable and wise. And so I said, what advice do you have? And he said, well, if you can't be interesting, be brief. And I'm going to tell you that doesn't really bolster your confidence much, but probably wise nevertheless. So the problems that face blind people and other people with disabilities have multiple dimensions. And of course, there is the physical dimension. If you're blind, well, you can't see. This isn't shocking or new. But there is also the social dimension. And the social dimension really comes down to the importance that is ascribed to the physical dimension. In other words, certainly there are things that I cannot see. But prejudice is really the exaggeration of the importance of the physical dimension. That isn't to diminish it. If I were to start talking, I have a thermostat, for example, that I cannot set. That's irritating. That's annoying. Sometimes quite annoying. But is it devastating? No, of course not. And yet society views me and views other people with disabilities as living devastated lives. Lives that are joyless, lives that are unproductive, lives of dependency. And it is that conception of disability that results in diminished opportunities. One of the things that I've been working on in the US is to end a practice that began in 1938, 79 years ago. In 1938 in the United States, as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal, the Congress adopted the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that piece of legislation established a minimum wage for workers in America, except for people with disabilities. In 1938, other working Americans were guaranteed the minimum wage, but not workers with disabilities. And by the way, this is at the time that we had a president with a disability. But think about why that would be. Society views people with disabilities as profoundly limited. And if you were a member of Congress in 1938 and I said to you, Madam Congresswoman or Mr. Congressman, this is unjust. Why are people with disabilities being excluded from this protection? You would have said, they're being excluded for their own good. If we required an employer to pay a person with a disability the minimum wage, no one would hire them. And if we cover people with disabilities, we are dooming them to poverty and unemployment. Better some employment than none at all. That was the thinking in 1938. Well, today it's 2017. 79 years later, and in the US, people with disabilities are still not guaranteed the minimum wage. And so I describe people with disabilities as the exploitable class. An exploitable class based on societal attitudes, preconceptions, stereotypes about disability, an exaggerated view of the function of disability, which starts with the presumption that people with significant disabilities are severely limited or damaged people. There's a young man who sadly has passed away, and I met him about 10 years ago when he was in his, I believe he was just starting his second year at university, and he came down with spinal meningitis and nearly died. And so he went from being a person with no disability to suddenly being a person who was blind, who used a wheelchair, and who had impaired use of his hands. And so a rehabilitation agency sent him to work in a segregated work facility, what we call a sheltered workshop. Now think about that. This young man suffered no cognitive impairment. He was studying at university, but because he acquired a significant disability, no one talked to him about going back and studying. Instead, the message was, you have a disability, therefore, you are now destined to a life on the margin of society. What was the job they had him do? They had him folding pizza boxes. And this is a good illustration of the policy behind the subminimum wage system in the United States. The way the law is written, many people read it and would say, well, this is fair. So here is how it works. Let's say that the contract is to fold pizza boxes. What the facility must do is first time how many pizza boxes a person without a disability can fold in a given period of time. So just making this up, let's say a person with no disability could fold 100 boxes in an hour. Then to earn the minimum wage, $7.25, you would have to fold 100 boxes. That's the standard. And so the logic says that if you're only able to fold 50 pizza boxes in that same period of time, then you should be paid half of the hourly wage. Now, on one level, that's objectively fair, isn't it? In other words, if I'm a pizza store owner and I can hire a person with no disability and that person can fold 100 boxes an hour, why would I pay the same wage to a person who can only fold 50? That is the logic that perpetuates the subminimum wage system. And the flaw is not so much in the abstract as it is the collection of low expectations, the collection of assumptions about disability. Why was Christopher folding pizza boxes? He had been doing well in his university studies. Some friends of mine found Christopher, and through a long series of interventions, we got him back into school. He finished his associate's degree with a 3.6 grade point average. Christopher decided that he wanted to be a guidance counselor, a school guidance counselor. And so he transferred to a 4-year university program. And at the end of his junior year, he had an overall GPA of 3.6. He was doing very, very well academically. Is there anything about Christopher's disability that would have a limiting impact on his ability to be an effective school guidance counselor? No. Oh, some nominal things around record keeping and maybe some assistive technology. But there is nothing intrinsic in his disabilities that would have made him a less effective guidance counselor. But his disabilities made him a less effective pizza box folder. Part of the problem with the subminimum wage system is that it starts with a presumption that a person with a disability will only be able to do very low-skilled, low-wage, repetitive work, simple work work that isn't too complex, work that isn't particularly demanding. Why? Because of the conception of people with disabilities as broken people, damaged people, profoundly limited people. The mindset. The logical intervention is not to send a man with limited hand dexterity to fold pizza boxes, but to send him back to school. This is really, of course, not surprising to any of you, but it is at the heart of our public policy debates around the world. When we talk about educational opportunities, UNESCO, the last UNESCO report that I saw said that in developing countries, 98% of children with disabilities are not in school. 98%. And on the purely objective level, think of the damage that does to their future opportunities. Literally not educated. And why are children with disabilities not in school? It isn't because there is a direct tie between the demands of school and the disability. It isn't that logically derived. They're not in school because they're presumed to be damaged people, people who will never care for themselves. If you have severely limited resources, why would you waste those resources on someone who is going to require care for all of his or her life? The lack of opportunity is the expression of prejudice. It is the expression of a social concept of disability that magnifies or exaggerates the literal dimension of a physical disability or the aspects of an intellectual disability or a person with some other type of disability. And this has an impact, of course, on employment. It has an impact on independent living. It has an impact on the way people are treated every day. I can say to you, and I don't say this with bitterness, but frankly, every day of my life, I am demeaned. Not by people who wish me ill, but just the opposite, by people who wish to be kind to me. And yet, they automatically treat me as though I am, well, I'm trying to think of a polite word for inferior. That's how they treat me. People feel perfectly free to go up to a blind person and take charge of them, as if you found a 2-year-old wandering unattended in an airport. And many times it's amusing. Sometimes it's annoying. I was in a hotel, and I got to my hotel room, and just as I was about to use my key card, a man literally snatched the card out of my hand and said, "What is your room number?" And I said, I didn't want to say, it's none of your darn business. I said, "Well, this is my room." "What is your room number?" This is my room. And I'm trying to be polite. I've been here now 2 days, and I know this is my room. "What is your room number?" "Room 328. This is your room." Okay. So exasperating, sure. But think about the impact when you are treated that way day after day after day. The cumulative impact that has on people with disabilities and their ability to combat that discrimination, that exaggerated view of disability that constricts opportunities. Which leads me really to the final point. Once we recognize that what we're dealing with is opportunity constricted mostly by social construction, mostly by social attitudes, stereotypes, preconceptions, assumptions about disability, an exaggerated view of disability. Recognizing that doesn't erase it. And I don't know that there's anything that will fully erase it. But the only thing that can make a difference is to work together collectively to change those attitudes, to educate the public about the ability of people to live integrated, productive lives, not because they're miraculous or not because God has granted them some sort of compensatory skill. I mean, people assume that I have better sense of smell than Graham's guide dog. And I don't mean this disrespectfully, but I'm glad I don't. Hope none of you are self-conscious. But again, it's that exaggerated view of disability. But working together, we can pass legislation. Working together, we can help change society's understanding of disability. And working together, we can support people with disabilities, be it a person who has newly acquired a disability, like this young man, Christopher, who I described to you. Christopher, who would have spent his life folding pizza boxes because he had no idea what was possible as a person who had acquired significant disabilities. So it is instilling in people with disabilities that sense of dignity and that true perspective on disability, that sure, there are objective consequences to disability. It is annoying to not be able to see things from time to time. But I don't wake up in the morning in sadness, wishing that I could see. When I want to set my thermostat, I wish I could see. But it's not something that needs to destroy a life. I have an education. I have been continuously employed ever since finishing my graduate school training. I'm married. I have the great honor of paying a mortgage every month. Have 2 children, and I've had the capacity to live an integrated, productive life, certainly because I've done my best to work hard and do what I can. But I say quite sincerely, without other blind people in my life who had inspired and encouraged me, and frankly, who believed more in me than I believed in myself, I do not believe I would have had that opportunity to live a rich and fulfilled life. The work that you do every day makes a difference because we're changing society, helping society expand its thinking. And by the way, that work isn't just an act of charity to make life better for people with disabilities. As we help society put disability into proper perspective, society is strengthened. People are living longer. Most people will experience some level of disability. And if they believe that disability means helplessness and hopelessness, then they're going to end up isolated and depressed, not because it's inevitable, but because of their thinking, their attitudes and assumptions about disability. So this is important work. I'm very pleased and honored to be here with you tonight. When Graham was saying this was White Cane Day, and I'm thinking, that's October 15. I know I crossed the international date line, and I was trying to work out how it got to be the 15th already. But I'm really honored to be here with you for this celebration, and appreciate the very kind welcome that I've received from all of you. Thank you very much.